Bob. We're going to start off with a little bit about Bob's family. This is not your typical suburban family. It has pretty extraordinary people in the family. Bob can tell us all about your dad, your brother and sister, and what they did in their lives.
Well, thanks, Gary. Good afternoon to all of you. Well, about my family, my dad was born in 1890. He was born on a farm in St. Joseph, Missouri. And he attended some college, I don't know the name of the college, in Omaha, where he met my mother, and she was born in 1899. He was of Irish and English heritage. Mother's father was named Flanagan, born in County Cork, Ireland, and mother was a Heafy from Scotland. So there's a lot of Irish in us. I think that you recognize the name Flanagan. My grandfather, his cousin, I believe, was Father Flanagan, who founded Boys Town in Omaha. And Dad went on through the Depression. I was born in 32. My brother Jim born in 27, and my sister Beverly in 23. So Dad went through the Depression as the executive vice president of Nye Snyder Jenks, which at the time was the largest grain concern in the United States. He was in his early 40s. And I think it was because of the Depression. It went bankrupt later in the 30s, and he formed a farm co-op, and was pretty well known as a grain man nationally. He was then put on loan to the United States government, and along with Jesse Tapp, who was the then president of Bank of America, the two of them and their team formulated the Farm Parity Program for the New Deal for Roosevelt and the Commodity Stabilization Service and Commodity Credit Corporation. Excuse me. He was then asked to climb the ladder some more, I guess, and become as either undersecretary or assistant secretary or assistant deputy undersecretary, whatever the titles they give out. Still in his 40s. But he had to move to London with his family. This was near the end of the 30s, to be in charge of all grain concerns for the United States outside of the United States, that is worldwide. And of course, I was still very young. So what I'm telling you is what I remember very little of, but I heard from my brother and my sister and my mother. And one can imagine having to consider going to London, England in the late 30s with your family. And he decided, I'm not going to do that, given what was happening, of course, in Europe and what was to ensue. So the government wished to keep him and appointed him the director of the Commodity Stabilization Service and Commodity Credit Corporation in the Minneapolis office, their largest office outside of Washington, given that Cargill and General Mills and many of the big, really big grain companies were headquartered in Minneapolis, and I think still are. So we had moved. I was born in Evanston, Illinois. We moved to Edina, Minnesota, a suburb of Minneapolis, then to Washington, D.C., Chevy Chase, Maryland. I can remember my mother driving us back from Washington to Minneapolis, probably in 37 or 38, maybe 39, because I think it was a 39 Buick. I tend to remember cars. Why? Another thing, want to relate to you is in 1935, we were in Edina, Minnesota, and I was 2 years old, 2+. And my dad and my mother and my brother and sister actually took a vacation in a new 35 Oldsmobile four-door. They drove from Minneapolis to Acapulco in 1935. I've got motion pictures to prove it. Of course, I didn't think much of it at all at the time. I stayed home with a live-in maid we had, Edna Vick. And but looking back at it and thinking about it, just can you imagine 1935 Minneapolis to Acapulco? Well, that was my dad and my mother. Lower, okay. My Spitfire of an Irish mother, I'll tell you. So, but she drove us later on from Washington, D.C. back to Minneapolis in this '39 Buick. You know, my sister and my brother. My sister went on to win scholarships in piano at Juilliard School of Music. She also won a scholarship to Philadelphia Conservatory of Music. Her teacher was Madame Olga Samara-Stokowski, Leopold Stokowski's wife, and she was considered the #1 piano instructor in that field. And there she met William Capell, who was also a student of Madame Stokowski. William Capell was in his early 20s, and he was one of 3 recording artists for RCA Victor Red Seal. Hosea Turby, the violinist, was one, and Vladimir Horowitz was another, and William Capell. I have a picture of Capell. Capell had a penchant. I don't know. It's getting a little plosive. Yeah, goodness. He admired women of red hair. Well, Beverly had red hair. She was Irish, and he was wooing her. As a matter of fact, proposed to her. And I can remember his coming out to the house to play on her Steinway when he came to visit the University of Minneapolis Symphony Orchestra under Antel Dorado, came to play with them. And we would go to the concerts, and we'd go backstage afterwards. And I was probably 13, 12. I was just astonished that anyone could play the piano like that. I couldn't believe it. Even my sister. And unfortunately, he was killed in an airline accident coming back from an Australian tour, and they flew into a mountain at Kings Mountain down here near San Jose. So we lost him. My brother received the #1 appointment to West Point for the state. I have a copy of the letter at home from Walter Judd, the senator. And he couldn't pass a physical because he had astigmatism or something in an eye. This is right at the end of the war, World War II. So he went down and enlisted in the Army. They sent him to OCS, Officers Candidate School, 90-day wonder, and he got his lieutenancy in the Army Intelligence and was sent to Germany in the occupation forces, from where he sent home 2 German shepherds for me to take care of. I was 5 years younger. What am I going to do? All of a sudden, these 2 shepherds show up named Axel and Alex. Oh, my goodness. My first car. So that's pretty much, I think my parents, I didn't focus on this for a long time, but I think my parents were extremely proud to have been born in the 1890s and had all 3 of their children graduate from college. The daughter, a highly skilled concert pianist, and both the boys military officers. quite an accomplishment. So I give them immense credit. Well, that's my first car. It's a 1931 Pontiac split head 6. Anybody know what a split head 6 is? No. Dave Buchanan says he does.
It's worth $50.
Yeah, $50. That's right. The split head 6 was a straight 6, flat head, of course, and they probably weren't too sure they could form that long a 6-cylinder head and have it work. Or maybe they just split it for maintenance purposes. I don't know, but it was a split head 6. There were 2 heads in line. My dad had gotten us a job, I say us, my buddy Bob Carlson, who later became an Eagle Scout and earned a PhD in mechanical engineering. Great guy. We were 16, and my dad got us a job with the U.S. Forestry Service north of Grand Marais, Minnesota. Now, Grand Marais, Minnesota, on the north shore of Lake Superior, is about as north as you can get without being in Canada. And then the Gunflint Trail goes up from there towards Canada. And we were in a logging camp up there. We're 16. And all these guys, had about a dozen on the team, and our job is to walk through the white pines and spread lye, I think it was, on the ribes plants that were killing the white pines. That's what we did. We had to string our lunches up in the trees so the bears wouldn't get them. We had to put ropes over the limbs and hoist it up. But we heard about this car. That's a good idea. $50. And it was down at a logging camp about 10 miles south of Grand Marais, again on the north shore of Lake Superior. So, oh, well, we went down there. You know, the exuberance and the naivete of youth, you know. I can hardly believe it. We got a ride down there with one of our buddies, and it was in the afternoon. I don't know why we couldn't wait till the weekend, but, you know, had to do it right now. And trying to think of who's in the picture. I can't quite see it. I'm in there somewhere. Carlson's there. But the big guy is, there's a logger, big strapping guy. He comes out and very pleasant. Of course, he wanted to sell the car. And he was showing us the car. So he said, well, let's start it up. So he goes out and cranks it and gives it a couple of turns. The crank fired right up. I thought, wow, this is really pretty neat stuff. We're going to get a car. So we gave him the $50 and headed back to camp. You might notice that it has semi-truck wheels and tires on it. Those are from a semi-truck. You know, the old snap ring wheels, you could kill yourself. You take an arm right off if you did it wrong. Yeah, some people were shaking their head, yeah. So we started out, and I was driving, of course, and we were going towards U.S. Highway 61. And it was about a 110 or 15 degree turn. And I swear when I put my foot on the brakes, the car went faster, went right to the floor. Well, what do I do now? I remember grabbing the emergency brake, had a great big handle, you know, next to the gear shift, pulling on it, and it was slowing it down. It's a pretty heavy car. So I took the turn up on 2 wheels, came back down, the lights went off, and the engine shut off. And here we were in the middle of U.S. Highway 61. Now, given this is like 1948, something like that, hardly any traffic, of course. Finally, a guy stopped, came along. He said, okay, I'll give you a push. He says, there's a filling station down about half a mile. You can get some fresh gas and so forth. So he gave us a push and got us started. I remember filling a tank. I didn't dare turn it off. Yeah, oh, that's right. We couldn't start it. We thought, oh, well, when the engine went off, we thought all we have to do is go out and crank the car, you know, like the guy did, you know. We couldn't budge that crank. We jumped up and down on that thing. You couldn't do anything with it. But anyway, we got it started. Now we go up to north, up to Grand Marais, and we take off up the Gunflint Trail, a couple miles, a few miles. Well, the lights went out. Now you're on the Gunflint Trail, which is no wider than, no, it's not even, it's half the width, yeah, half the width of this room. And it's kind of dirt and gravel and so forth. And the forest comes right down to the side. And the lights went off, so we waited until another car came along. We followed that car because using its headlights. And then everything quit again. So we had to park a car and walk in. Scared the daylights out of us. Every time we heard a sound, we thought the bears were going to come out of the... What? Well, later. Thank you, though. Anyway, we had quite a time with that car. Well, I got to tell you one more thing about the car. When my father saw the car, which we had to leave south of Duluth, we were going to drive it back to Minneapolis. We had a flat tire. Well, remember, it had semi-truck tires. What are we going to do with this? So we had to leave it. Along the highway, we hitchhiked back to our homes in Minneapolis, probably another 100 miles. Weeks later, my dad said, well, let's go get the car. So we drive up there, and there it is, sitting on the side of the road. And there, who wouldn't want to take that? You know? And my dad walks over to it. He had a real great sense of humor. He walks over to it, and I saw him, took his finger, and it went right through the fender, the left rear fender, and he said, pie crust. So we named it Pie Crust. And, well, anyway, Carlson and I, we had it in his garage over the winter. We took it apart. We were going to fix this thing and all that. We did all that. We put it all back together, and I'm sure we had a couple parts left over. It wouldn't start. We couldn't get it started. We pushed it down the hill. It didn't start, so my dad finally said, that's it. The two dads got together and said, we're going to junk it. So that's the story of Pie Crust. And what do we have here? Oh, yeah, these are two of my neck. Well, I had a couple cars in between.
Yeah, these are the only two pictures I had in this.
Hmm?
These are the only two pictures I had of the group of cars that you had.
Well, you ought to spend a little more time with me.
Well, I was hoping this would fill it in.
You only spent 16 hours with me. 41 Plymouth. Oh, I love that car. A business coupe. And then the 41 Ford. The 41 Ford, as you can see, I had it lowered, and I put fender skirts on it, and I put fog lights on it. And I remember in the garage, I had in my garage, and I was going to spray paint the dashboard green. And my mother was helping me. Well, guess where a lot of the green paint went? On her hair. She never let me forget that. My Irish Spitfire. But, oh my goodness, there's my first. I was working at W.R. Stevens Buick in the summer, going to college, driving a Cervicar, which is a three-wheel motorcycle with a bar on it. And you go out to the customer's house and you hook the motorcycle up to the bumper and drive their car back for service, and then reverse it when it's complete. You take it back out. And a friend of mine said, you know, Bob, you ought to check out these British sports cars that Archie Walker Jr. imported cars. So, tell me about them. So he told me, okay. So I went out there. Talk about love at first sight. I was just, I can still see it, feel it, sense it. I was just I drove an MGTC, I think, but he had there's a little place. You have Jag and Healy, MG, Morse. I think he had Porsche too. And he's from a very wealthy family in Minneapolis. The Walker Art Center is still very prominent. And I decided I'm going to go to work here. I've got to get next to these. I got to get one of these cars. So I met the general manager, Jim, oh, sorry, can't get the last name. And I said, I'll do anything. I'll be a gopher. I'll do anything that you want me to do. I've just got to work here with you. I got to learn about these cars. Oh, okay. So he had me paint the service department. Then I painted the parts department. Then I painted some of the building. And we went to fairs. Fairs were big around, the Midwest. And we drove these cars. I remember driving to South Dakota. I was driving a Morris Minor to South Dakota. I couldn't keep up with anybody. Oh, it really bothered me. I remember vividly. So an MGTD came in on a repossession. What's a repossession? I have no idea what a repossession is. Oh, he couldn't make the payments. Oh. What if I could make the payments, Jim? And he put together a deal for me to take over the contract, I guess. And all of a sudden, I had an MGTD, 54 MGTD. So I had my first car, and there it is. Oh, yeah. Oh, that's Del May. That's the center on our basketball team.
Oh, is that good?
Yeah. I didn't know you had. That's my dad. There he is. There he is. Oh, great guy. So,
Here's your first car flip.
this is what I'm thinking about. This is the Gymkhana out of a farm in Minnesota, and we went out there and we ran through several courses out there. God, I had all these pictures. You imagine that in Minnesota? Look at the cars. Oh. So I did pretty well in the Gymkhana. I thought, oh, I guess I can drive all right. And then I met a fellow by the name of Don Skogmo. Don was a wealthy scion of a family, and he had a filling station, and he had some cars, including a D Jaguar. This was 1955. He said, Bob, you ought to think about ice racing. Pardon me? Ice racing? What is it? Huh? He says, yeah, every year, SCCA, Sports Car Club of America, we go to Lake Phelan in St. Paul, part of the St. Paul Winter Carnival, and we borrow a flamethrower from the Air Force Base, and we melt the ice in a kidney shape. We plow it first, of course, make the snow banks, get the snow out of the way. We melt the ice and pour sand on it, and we race. Really? Oh, yeah, you got to come out and try this. You really do. Oh, okay. So, well, here, that's my buddy Paul Olden. Ellen remembers Paul, and so does Wayne. Yeah. Oh, you think it was cold? Here we are. I don't know where I got the helmet. I couldn't tell you. But before I raced, I had to be approved by a senior driver to race. So they gave me Russ Lee, who was a Minnesota dirt track champion, and he was going to teach me how to drive. So he drove in my car.
That's right. Go ahead.
And he said, we went around the course, and I thought, oh, what's he going to do to my car? I thought the engine was going to come out through the hood. I've never driven it like this before. My goodness. He says, Bob, you got to. Then he had me drive and made me do this and do that. I went pretty good. He said, I want to give you a couple pieces of advice. One is stay out of the snowbanks. Oh, well, that's a pretty good idea. He said, no, I'm not kidding you. You'll see a lot of cars in the snowbanks, which I did. You'd lose and you go into the snowbank. He said, the second thing is that, I've told you we pour sand on the course. Now, this is before lug tires. This was street tires. And that went on for a few years. We were out in California here. We raced what we drove every day. So he says, they pour sand on the course. Now, everybody is going to go inside the turns. You don't want to do that because they're going to wear the sand off. there's going to be no sand there. You go on the outside of the turns. You watch. So I did. And that's the result. I won all those trophies, and I couldn't believe it. I thought, I guess I can do this. I can drive this pretty good. So then a friend of mine had a Triumph TR2. What are you doing?
No, go ahead.
And
We just have an Arnold Bristol in the parking
oh,
lot.
that's right, absolutely, yes, a nice one too. A friend of mine bought a Triumph TR2. This was a brand new car, in the United States. So we drove down to, I think it was Iowa City, Iowa. General Curtis LeMay of SAC, Strategic Air Command, was letting SCCA use the Air Force bases to run races. So we drove down there. It wasn't very far. And I saw all these cars. I couldn't, again, I'm just amazed at what I was looking at. Where'd all these cars come from? They'd never been in my life before, but they are now. I mean, look at them. Can you imagine that? 2-liter Maserati, Arnold Bristol. The Porsches, well, it's a Porsche. My goodness. Porsche, I only saw one Porsche. It didn't look like that. So I was quite enamored with the TR2 and the performance and the price range of it. So, oh yeah. So I was in ROTC in college, Air Force ROTC, and I was the most gung-ho cadet you have ever imagined. The last 2 years of college, when you sign up, you were actually in the Air Force for a 4-year stint, 2 years in college. And my cousin was a colonel in the Air Force, and ace shot down German planes and was shot down himself twice. Bailed out of a P-38, escaped the Germans once, and was freed in the Liberation Forces the second time. And I just love this guy. Personification of the jet jockey. He had over 5,000 hours then in single-engine planes. And that's why I joined ROTC Air Force, because of him. So I got going in that. I was just doing everything. I was asked to join the Arnold Air Society, which I did. Ed Gilbertson tells me he was in Arnold Air Society too. And I became commander of Arnold Air Society. And I started the Tail Spinner, the first newspaper, newspaper in the United States for ROTC. And I got the Angels course started, get the girls involved. And that was my motto in college pretty much, was cars first, girls second. Yeah. I figured that out pretty fast. You don't get the girls you get the good girls if you have the cars. So let's go cars first. And sorry for the humor, but that's my life. And I was doing everything in the ROTC. And I was a cadet major in my junior year, which was unheard of. So I went to summer camp and came back and excelled there. The first day of class, they said, all of those who can't pass the flight physical, step outside the room. Well, I couldn't pass it because I'm colorblind. So I stepped out of the room and said, well, you people are not going to receive an Air Force commission. You'll get a commission in the Air National Guard. Well, not me. Now, all the stuff that I've been doing, and so for you guys, I'm not going to stand for this. So they court-martialed me. Yeah. I refused to hold a meeting with the Arnold Air Society. I wouldn't get the newspaper out. I didn't do anything. They court-martialed me. This is where my piano playing came in. I'd been learning piano on my sister Steinway. Self-taught. I played boogie-woogie. Now, boogie-woogie in those years was really, really, everybody listened to boogie. They loved boogie-woogie. I used to take modern theme songs and put it to a boogie bass. Had a great time doing it. Well, Arnold Air Society, we had various meetings and parties through the year, and we'd invite the staff, the regular Air Force guys, our teachers. And the Colonel Kermit D. Stevens, He had ribbons up to here with a command senior pilot wings up here. He was quite a character. So they said, well, we don't have the authority to throw you out of the Corps, but that's our recommendation. This is the court martial. We have to remand the whole thing to the colonel. Oh, okay. So I went to the colonel's office and reported, and he said, Cole, what am I going to do with you? Oh, yeah, sit down. So I explained, I pleaded my case. He said, I understand. Yeah. He said, you realize you were being considered for cadet colonel next year. It never even crossed my mind. I'm just doing my thing, Press on. And he said, I'm not going to let them throw you out of the Corps. I can't do anything about your rank and all that and so forth. You stay in the Corps and keep your nose clean, blah, blah, blah. Now, he and I had developed a rapport because whenever we had these parties, he asked me to play the piano. He loved boogie woogie. So we had this little rapport going. So I think that's what maybe saved me. And when I graduated, I remember I wrote to the Air Force that I wanted to be stationed at or near an accredited university to pursue my academic career. And I got this brown envelope. I never forget it. In the foyer of our home, opened this envelope. I was to be stationed as a public information officer, PIO, for the United States Air Force, 30 Van Ness Avenue, San Francisco. Oh, do you think the colonel had something to do with that? I think. So all my buddies were sent to radar stations in North Dakota and Montana, and they go, how'd that guy do that? So, oh yeah. So I drove out here with a couple buddies, and I can still remember seeing San Pablo Bay and Suisun Bay and San Francisco Bay and the Bay Bridge. This is 1955. A little different now. A little change. So I got my uniform, got situated in a one-room apartment out in Van Ness Avenue, and I wanted to buy a Triumph TR2. And I walked into Shelkovali's BMC and met a few of the people there. And of course, I was an SCCA member, from Minneapolis and Land O'Lakes region. And I had my uniform, got to know some people, but they didn't have Triumph. So Continental Cars down Van Ness Avenue had Triumph. So I went down there, met the owner, and there was a BRG TR2 sitting on the floor, wire wheels, and believe it or not, U.S. Royal, thin striped white wall tires. Can you believe it? It looked pretty neat. Oh, there's my car. Well, the owner introduced me to a banker that happened to be there. Now I'm in my uniform. I'm pretty interested in that car. And he said, you want that car, son? I said, well, I'd sure like to have it. He said, well, why don't you come down and visit me at my bank, see what we can do for you. So I get down. He was the branch manager of the largest B of A branch in I guess Northern California. I remember all the iron and brass and wood desks, and really very impressive place. And he said, how much money have you got? Well, I've got $200. I said, oh, well, he wrote up a contract, time plan contract, put me in the car. Oh, you need some insurance? We have to add that, $100. Things didn't cost much of anything. And so I had my TR2. And of course I had to start racing it or doing something with it. And there was a Gymkhana, SCCA Gymkhana up at Willits near Sacramento. That's the car right there. That was taken to Santa Barbara at the races. Drove all the way down there, raced for two, drove all the way back. But the Gymkhana at Willits, I've never seen so many sports cars. I just couldn't imagine that many existed in one place. I'm just a little guy from Minneapolis, you know. So I stood around and I thought, wow, look at these guys. You know, there are 3 or 4 different events where you back up and you do this and on pylons and all that. I don't know if I want to do that. I had to really screw my courage up, so to speak. And about 5 minutes before the entries closed, I walked up with my $2 and showed them my license from the Land O'Lakes region, Minneapolis. I was a member. And okay, I tied for top time of the day. I thought these guys were all hot dogs out here. Well, I guess I can drive with them. That's really what I thought. So I decided to start racing, and I went to Buchanan Field. Back then we had mark races, or all Triumphs, all MGs, all Healey's, all Jags in their own race. And I won those and met Rusty Hyde, who's a sub-distributor for Triumph. And he kind of took me under his wing and asked me, would you like to drive a modified Triumph? Oh, sure, yeah. As you know, press on. It's my motto, it's press on regardless. And he was in Mill Valley. He was a sub-distributor in Northern California for Cal Sales, owned by Dorothy Dean in Los Angeles. And we took apart a Triumph TR2, drilled the frame to lighten it. We widened the track. We got Dunlop disc brakes from England, the same brakes that were on the D-type Jag. Did various and sundry things and modified it. So we had both cars then. I mean, I had my TR2 and he had his TR2, and then later I got a TR3. And the best story of that car, the modified Triumph, was down in Palm Springs in 1956. You know, Palm Springs in '56 was in the middle of nowhere. You drove for hours through the brambleweed bushes, rolling across the freeway, a highway rather, only two-lane highway, and we finally got to Palm Springs. And they had an airport there with a 1-mile straightaway. So here we were with that car, and we were competing really against Cal Sales modified Triumph, driven by Bobby Oker, an established driver, well-known driver. And here we are in the main event on Sunday in 2 Triumphs, sitting at the very back, of course, of the grid. Up in front were Carroll Shelby and Phil Hill and Dan Gurney and, you know, Max Milchowski and Bob Drake and all these guys. And so the race started. I think it was first or second lap, Oker passed me. Oh, how did he do that? That's not going to stand. I'm not going to let that happen. So I started chasing him, and we came out onto the straight a lap or 2 later, and I was right alongside of him. I was in a right drive car. His car was left drive, with the exhaust coming out right in front of the tire, right by my ear. And we were going down the back straight, absolutely couldn't gain an inch on each other. Matter of fact, my pit crew thought I'd gone into a hay bale or something because they couldn't see me because I'm on the far side away from the pits. They just saw Oker. And I'm thinking, I've got disc brakes and you've got drum brakes. And you got the exhaust right in my ear. I'm going to wait till you shut off. Which I did. And I just kept going. And I can still remember my driver doing this through the turn, but I got through the turn and started pulling away from him. Well, Bill Breeze had been doing the engine on this modified car. And he had shortened the push rods to equal what they took off the head, so the kinematics of the valves weren't what they should be, and we snapped a shaft on the top of the engine. You know, I had to retire, but we had beaten Oker. We were a couple hundred yards ahead of him by that time, and he snapped a half shaft, so he didn't finish anyway. But that was a great event. It actually was very early. I'm like, oh, good
And you got a
heavens.
little call from the Air Force.
Oh. Yes, I'm in the Air Force at that time. And of course, the Air Force people knew that I'd been racing cars and I'm supposed to know something about cars. And General Curtis LeMay back at SAC in Omaha, Offutt Air Force Base in Omaha, got the wild idea. Remember, he was allowing SCCA to use the air bases for the racing. He got the wild idea of getting an Indianapolis race car and putting a jet engine in it and using it as a recruiting tool. Oh, well, who in the Air Force knows anything about cars and recruiting it? Cole, out in San Francisco, he races, he knows about those things. So, so they dragged me back to Omaha. What an experience. I was there several weeks. I remember saluting LeMay because we walked in and out of the same building. 'Cause I was working for the PIO officer, Colonel Reed Tilley. What a neat guy. He was bird colonel, head BIO for SAC. He actually tried to keep me there. He said, you know, Bob, I'd really like to have you stay here and work for SAC. He said, you know, General LeMay could do it in a phone call. You could be here this afternoon. You wouldn't have to go back to San Francisco. Huh? Oh, well, I'll think about that. So about a nanosecond later, I'm thinking San Francisco, Omaha. I don't think so. So I didn't stay there. But they completed the car. My job was to put it into the recruiting activity for the Air Force.
Previous picture.
Oh, my goodness sakes, yeah. That's me.
Yeah, same show.
Oh, well, I saw the car. I don't think it was a jet engine. I think it was a turbine.
Yes.
Yeah. And it was just quite an experience. Well, here's an assortment. That's on the way to Palm Springs. That's our tow rig, and that's the modified Triumph. This is the modified Triumph before we put an aluminum body on it, a steel body. And can't quite see.
Palm Springs up here. Incidentally, in the upper left-hand corner, car 200 is driven by Pete Snell.
That's right.
Any of you race and look inside your helmet, it's got a label that says Snell Foundation. That's what it was named after. He was killed shortly thereafter.
And he was a good friend of
Not that
mine.
race, but the race you attended. This race down here in the lower left.
Yeah, I raced that up there in Arcata. I was a pallbearer at his funeral.
So this was your first full season,
Mm-hmm.
whole year.
Yeah. With the two cars. Oh, my goodness. Then I got a 56 TR3, and later, some of you might remember, in 57 or 58, the TR3 had a wide grille. I don't know if you have a picture of it here, but we took the same car and took that front apron off and put the new one on there, and it looked like a new car. Yeah. But you can see some of the trophies there. Well, I recognize them. Yeah, here. And the Lotus. That Lotus was owned by Jim Lowe, who was the regional executive for CCA. And,
I said Bobby was.
oh, sure, of course he does. And he asked me to co-drive with him at Cotati at the 6-hour Enduro. And Bill Breeze did the engines. Bill Breeze had this wonderful little shop over in Richardson's Bay, Sausalito. He worked on my cars, he worked on Jim's cars. And Jim called me one day and we talked about it, and he was a very certain kind of guy. He had a whole list of things he wanted me to do with the car. One of them was to take the car out and drive it and break it in because it was brand new. So in '56, I just simply got in the car and drove it out to Bodega Bay and back, just like any car, right? You know, can you imagine that out with the cows?
How big a road, Jim?
Oh, it was just like, I can still see it. Nobody was around except me and the Le Mans, Lotus Le Mans, and the cows. Anyway, we were at Catania, a 6-hour race, and we were running first in class with a modified class, of course, a little engine and everything, and it locked in third gear. A little A30 transmission for that engine just wasn't going to take it. And it locked in third gear, and I pulled on the bits, and Bree said, well, you got to finish the race. There's nothing I can do with it. You got to. Fortunately, it was third gear. So slipping the clutch and so forth and so on. We finished. I think we finished fifth overall.
First in class.
First in class, yeah, probably. Well, yeah, because of the little engine, yeah. What's this?
These were just two advertisements. One came in a race program, so you can see Bob in a modified car.
Right.
This was a short-lived publication. It only lasted 2 or 3 years, and it's on the cover. And previous car, you just the previous picture. Did can.
This guy's quite the sleuth. He's dug all this stuff up.
So this then 57 was kind of an interesting year. You started out racing, and then you decided to go back to school.
Yeah, well, '56, I raced at Pebble Beach in the
Yes,
forest
yes.
with the TR3. And I was chasing Bobby Oker in a Morgan. Now, any one of us knows that a well-driven Triumph and a well-driven Morgan are prepared equally. The Morgan's going to win every time. Outhandles, it's lighter, it's faster. No question about it. Except when I was driving a Triumph. I didn't win, but I thought I could. I was in front of the rest of the Triumphs, and I was chasing Bobby Oker in that Morgan. And I ran a bearing in my Triumph. I still have that bearing at home, inscribed Pebble Beach, 1956. And that's Arcata. That's Jim Lowe's scooter. And I was assistant regional executive, Sports Car Club of America. I'm 23, 24. But I was in chairman of press and publicity. And this is one of the results of that.
Tell them the story, though, about when you decided to go back to school.
Right. Well, I got out of the service, and they had, I told you that they changed for U.S. Air Force, the National Guard. Within 6 months of being on active duty, they went back the other way, and I got my commission in the Air Force. It's pretty arbitrary, these guys. And I don't like that. I guess that's some of the reasons I thought of why I. And then before I got out of the Air Force, they made me a captain. I think they're trying to tell me something. No, I said no. So I wanted to go back to school, so I went back to Minneapolis. And I got a phone call from Shel Cavalli. And he was on the board with me, and I'd gotten to know him. And he said, Bob, we got to have you back out here. You know about racing, you know about Laguna Seca, you know about Pebble Beach, and through your activities as PIO, you're in touch with all the mass media. And it's true. That's what I did in the Air Force. So I knew most of the press people and radio and newspapers and magazines. We only had one TV station. I think it was KPIX. This is 56. And so he says, I'll pay you $600 a month and help you with the car and other things and so forth. I want you back out here. Now, if you knew Shel Cavalli, Shel didn't take no ever for an answer. He just kept after you. He was a very certain kind of guy. And I went downstairs and talked to my dad about it, and he said, well, Dad, I love cars. I know cars. Maybe I ought to go into that industry, into that business. So I said, okay, Shel, I'm coming back out. So I came back out, went to work publicizing Laguna Seca. It was called Pebble Beach, the 7th Pebble Beach Road Races at Laguna Seca, 7th annual. And so we were very this was the program for it. That's Sammy Weiss's XKSS, and I'm sitting in it. That's me with the helmet on. Yeah, I did that program, lots of other stuff. And we got, Lou Evans' book says we got, in an article that I wrote for that magazine, for the SCCA magazine, we got 65,000 people down there. Now, I often have said 57,000. I think the 65 was an estimate early, and 57 is probably accurate, but think about it, 1957, long time ago. I have 57,000 people to the first Laguna Seca. And in the old car, they drove their old cars, and yeah, all these people, it was just astonishing that they wanted to see this race. And, well, the rest is history, obviously. Yes, I was working for Cavalli, so I didn't have a Triumph, and that was my streetcar, the Coupe, the MG Coupe. So I had to race in the first event. So I did. I don't know. Am I trying to get in between those guys, or I don't know what I'm doing. But anyway, it wasn't very successful. The Coupe is hardly a car to race.
Now comes a little fun.
What's this?
Mr. Sherwood.
Oh, the invasion. The invasion of
How many remember Don
Stockton.
Sherwood? And Carter B. Smith, not Carter B. Smith, but Hap Harper.
Hap Harper.
Well,
Well,
I'll
that-
tell a little story about
Yeah.
this too.
Well, I had met Gene Babbo, and there probably a number of people here in the room. Gene,
You're there before Carter and
yeah,
Don Sherwood and Hap Harper.
and Sherwood was an absolute nutcase. He dominated the airways. Everybody in town listened to him, it seemed, on KSFO. He was a disc jockey, and he was hilarious and a nutcase. So he decided he was going to invade Stockton. Oh. So Hap Harper was going to have all the planes, because Harper was up every morning doing traffic and weather, I guess, flying around. He was going to have his buddies in the airplanes, and Sherwood was going to get the tanks and the half tracks and the jeeps and all the military stuff. I'm not kidding. That's what went on back then. So Babbo and I got together. Well, hey, we ought to go do the sports cars. We'll go to Sherwood and we'll invade with him with the sports cars. Get a little publicity for the sports car community. That's a good idea. So we worked up a proclamation, and I remember walking into the studio, and he put us on the air, and we read this proclamation. Sure enough, he invaded Stockton. And I mean, it was just so goofy, as you can imagine. I mean, the road was nothing between, you get out there, a 2-lane road, which is now, 580? And I remember driving out to Park Air Force Base out there. That's where the Air Force Base, I had to go there about once a month when I was in the service. It was just nowhere. It was in the desert like. And so we got out to Stockton with all the planes flying over, and Sherwood's on the radio, and he's raising Cain. And the sports cars, we had a dozen sports cars, I guess. But that was the invasion of Stockton. Yeah, got a lot of publicity, all for naught, just a hoot.
And the spoils of war here.
What's that?
A couple of young ladies they hijacked on the way up here.
Oh, really?
Yeah, can you imagine
Oh, God. I had no part in that. PIO officers have no part in doing anything like that. Yeah, the money. Yeah, that's right. Where'd you find that?
This is all on a web.
I'll be darned. The invasion of
So
Stockton.
that's more or less the first part of our presentation. This is what we're going to talk about next time. So if you're in the neighborhood, please join us. There's some more adventures, some interesting things that you probably don't know about Bob. He helped start the candy store, and he raced at Sebring as part of the Triumph team. And down here, this is the one that really caught me so by surprise. He was a big boat racer, 20 years, including the Trans-Pac and several other open ocean races, and did very, very well. So we'll cover as much of that as we can next time. But if you have any questions, fire away. Everybody else say anything? Pardon?
Chuck Tatum defends.
No, they apparently they conceded. They signed a proclamation that called for peace, and that ended the whole ceremony right there.
All things you couldn't be doing today.
Anybody else? Question?
How did the Stockton Road racing get started out there?
That was part of Chuck Tatum's doing. That was a couple of years earlier, so Sherwood didn't have much of an impact on the road races because he had the SCCA behind him, so he had an ally.
Well, from a business point of view, if you look at how your dealership empire developed in Shelf Follies, how did you all coexist? How did that work for you the first 10?
That's part two.
Oh, okay.
You have to come back.
We'll get to that.
If you wanna- Go ahead if you want to answer that question. About how you all coexisted as dealers.
Oh, we just remained business friends till he passed. We were good friends, and I worked for him for 2 years, and went out on my own, and stayed in touch. You know, he was, as you know, immensely successful in a lot of directions. Just a very interesting fellow.
You
Ed?
know, like Charlie Rizagi?
What?
Charlie Rizagi?
What about him? I'm trying to get in the Charlie Rizagi mood. Yeah?
Today, the Ferrari dealer in San Francisco.
Oh, sure. Sure.
Pretty colorful.
And he had the bats.
Pardon?
He had the bats, the Alfa Romeo bats. Yeah. Yeah. I remember when I was selling Triumphs on Venice Avenue in the used car department, we had a bat. And it was Al Williams of the Papagayo Room. I think it was his car. It was on consignment. And Ken Schaff bought it from me. Some of you people might remember Ken Schaff. And here, many years later, at the Pebble Beach Concours, up in front of the lodge, all three bats were together. And Ken and I went over to look at them. I said, Ken, is that the car you bought for me? He says, yeah. What'd you pay for that? $11,000? I said, no, $1,100.
That's unfair.
Just a red used car. You know.